Germany, for all sorts of reasons of history, wants to be very careful when it comes to weapons in Europe. And what it also recognises is that if it makes public statements that tells Russia exactly what it's doing, it invites Russia to come out with statements that are inflammatory and start to scare the German population. So what we're seeing now is much more circumspect. I don't think the Germans will ever say we're giving them Taurus missiles. What they will actually just be doing is just under the radar supporting Ukraine. And then definitely the sort of weather vane is very definitely firmly now in Germany helping Ukraine. Sean Bell, former fighter pilot, now military analyst.
Thank you, Sean. Ukraine has said their military has struck several Russian weapon production sites, particularly using long-range drones of Ukraine's SBU security service to strike the Raduga Design Bureau, located in the town of Dunbar. So how significant is this attack?
Well, in the big scheme of things, it's not that significant. I think, first of all, it's worth mentioning that in most wars, World War I, World War II, the cause of the most casualties was artillery. It caused devastation around each side troops. In the current war between Russia and Ukraine, the thing that's causing most casualties is drones. About 80% of the casualties on the battlefield are drones at the moment. And that's one of the reasons why President Zelensky was so keen to get Ukraine to be able to generate 1 million drones a year from its own defense industrial base. Individually, drones are not that effective. The great thing they are is that you can swarm. In other words, you can deluge your defenses. If the Russian defenses were able to shoot 10 drones out the sky, attack them with 100, and some will get through. And I think that's what President Zelensky is doing very effectively, because drones are not that fast. They're not that well protected. They can't carry a big payload. They're very limited. But the great thing is they're relatively cheap. And what President Zelensky has been able to do is focus these attacks either on energy infrastructure, taking out Russia's oil facilities, or also now targeting some of their defense industrial base, their ability to develop weapons, deliver weapons. And if you look at the damage that's been done, it's not significant, but it does mean that Russia has to put more attention protecting that and therefore less attention on the front line.
So they reportedly bypassed Russian air defences. I was just wondering, as an RAF man yourself, or former RAF man, how is that possible?
I think the thing about air defences is I used to be flying military jets, and there are not that many of them. You fly very fast, and therefore the enemy's air defence system is tailored against you. So it's got radars that are looking for your radar cross-section. It's looking for things travelling fast. It's got missiles that are tailored for taking you out. And in my military jet, let's talk round figures, it was £50 million. Therefore, having a £1 million missile to take out a £50 million jet just makes sense. As soon as you now use that same missile defense system against drones, suddenly you've only got 5, 10 air defense missiles available. They're £1 million a time. But now all of a sudden, the enemy are firing at you $1,000 drones, and there are 1,000 of them. So all of a sudden, your air defense system is no longer as effective. It doesn't make sense financially, and you don't have enough missiles. And the danger is if you use up all your missiles, the next thing will happen is a military jet will come at you, and then you're in real trouble. So one of the things about these drones is they travel quite slowly, so it's quite difficult for a radar to pick them up. They're generally made of plastic and wood. Again, radar's quite difficult to pick them up. The most effective way of taking them out is either electronically jamming them or with a bullet, just fire a machine gun at them and eventually take them out. But as ever, if you launch enough of these things, some will get through. And that's where Ukraine has been very effective over the last few weeks and months.
So how important are drones becoming in and drone warfare becoming in this conflict?
It's becoming very important, but I think we've got to be quite careful here that the danger is we look at tactics. If you look at it strategically, we are now sort of over 3 years into this war, and Russia is winning. Russia is on the front foot. Ukraine is on the back foot. Russia is taking more and more settlements. And Ukraine, at the moment, doesn't have an answer to that. Now, it's costing Russia a lot of casualties along the way. Ukraine has been very effective at gradually nibbling away at Russian oil facilities, so they reduce the amount of money that Putin can use to fund the war. There's lots of positives you could take away from Ukraine, but grand strategically, it is losing the battle on the front line. And that's the problem with drone technology, is that it isn't going to change the course of the war. It is going to enable you to fight back. It is able for Ukraine, let's face it, they're the David to the Russian Goliath here. They can take the battle to Russia. They can show the Russian people that they're involved in a war, but they're not going to change the course of the war with these sorts of weapons.
And to go back to the factory in Raduga, it was located within 80 miles of Moscow. Is this important strategically?
Well, again, part of the reason you use drones is for effect. And part of that is that we saw some videos online of some of the drones striking their targets. And don't get me wrong, it's a big explosion, but the big scheme of things, there's not a lot of damage done. If you look back to sort of World War II, 1,000 bomber raids, laying waste to cities, it's nothing like that. They'll pretty quickly be able to dust it all down, get the facility going again, and off you run. Psychologically, though, it is very important. I went to Ukraine. I've been a few times to Ukraine. I went to Kyiv about 2 months ago. And psychologically, the attacks that are regularly happening into Kyiv, they don't do a great deal of damage, but psychologically, it's very wearing for the population. And for people living in Moscow who think they're a million miles away from the war, what this does do is it brings it to their doorstep. It brings explosions. It gets it on the news. They smell the smoke. All of a sudden, they start to realize that they are not immune from threat. And despite President Putin's assurances, he can't protect the whole of Russia. And that's the great value of these attacks.
And with regards to the fact that this factory produces Russian drones, we had John Foreman on Times Radio's Frontline saying that Russian production has plateaued. So in light of this, what are the implications of this attack on Russian military manufacturing?
Well, again, the danger is we can start to measure this and try with a micrometer, but the big scheme of things is that the Russians have got oil revenue flowing. They've got 40% of their GDP flowing into defense. They've got their defense industry on a war footing. They're buying weapons from China, from North Korea, and from Iran, and they are not short of weapons. If you look at Ukraine is very vulnerable. It's targeted by Russian missiles routinely. And the West, bluntly, has run out of war stocks of available missiles. And the West hasn't spun up its defense industrial base to be able to create a ready supply of this critical weapons that Ukraine needs. So in the big scheme of things, Russia is doing enough at the moment to advance its intention on the battlefield. The real question is when is Ukraine going to be able to secure some form of peace? Because at the moment, President Putin, I think, is feeling emboldened. He's feeling emboldened by President Trump trying to be nice to him rather than playing the bad guy. And if I was the military advisor to President Putin, I'd be telling him to push this summer, because he's on the front foot, he's got the initiative, and the international community seems to be fragmenting. So yes, it's really good that Ukraine can attack facilities like this. But bluntly, this isn't about this. This is about winning the war. And Ukraine is the wrong side of that equation at the moment.
And when it comes to these drone attacks also shutting down Russian airports, what is the wider strategy there? Again,
I think this is more trying to demonstrate to the Russians that they are involved in a war. I've never been to Russia, but it's very clear that those who live and work in Moscow, there's almost a sort of enclave that feels that the war is nothing to do with them. The way that they're securing the manpower to go out, the conscripts to go and fight, very few of them are coming from Moscow. Therefore, there's a danger that people just think this is a war going on miles away. I think what Ukraine did by invading the Kursk region, it demonstrated that actually they were at war. And just imagine, Times Radio generally has lovely offices in London. Just imagine you leave in the evening and suddenly the nearby offices are blown up. That's going to scare you. It's going to suddenly bring this all home. And that's exactly what Ukraine are trying to do. They're just trying to ramp up pressure.
So after these attacks, you're saying that it's hitting Russian morale. If you were Zelensky, or if you were Zelensky's advisor, what would you be telling him to do as his next step?
At the moment, I think it's not looking very positive for Ukraine, and he's got to knuckle down. I think what's the great news that's coming out at the moment from Germany, it relates to this, is that there's been a lot of talk about whether the Taurus missiles would be released to Ukraine. We don't know if they have, but what is clear from some of the public statements is that if you go back a few months, the West was prepared to let Ukraine have long-range weapons, but it wasn't prepared to let them use them against Russian targets in Russia itself. We now understand those restrictions have been lifted. That's a huge fill up, because all of a sudden now it's all very well attacking Russian targets with drones that only a fraction of them get through. If you can now attack them with a Taurus missile, that can do some serious damage. It's very fast, it's very accurate, and it's very effective. That will be something that will be really good. The other thing that came out was that the Germans have agreed a €5 billion aid package for Ukraine. And some of that isn't just weapons. What they're trying to do, and it relates to your questions around drones, is that we've run out of drones largely in the West. We can deliver small drones, but what we have got is some technology and a sort of assembly, a very early technology drones that we can send out the bits. We can send out a box of bits that if we were to assemble them into a modern drone, we'd have to do safety checks on them. We'd have to do flight checks. It would take months, maybe years, before they were certified and could actually be sold. Whereas actually, if you give the parts to Ukraine with an assembly instructions, but say, we can't warranty these, but if you want to use them, go ahead. Now, of course, Ukraine, because it's involved in a war of national survival, is just bolting these things together and sending them on their way. And I think that's proving to be a very effective way of Europe and the rest of the world actually putting some real potent capability into Ukraine's hands.
There you mentioned the Taurus missiles. How likely do you think that they will be okayed in Ukraine?
I think one of the things that's been interesting about the public statements over the last few days is Germany, for all sorts of reasons of history, wants to be very careful when it comes to weapons in Europe. And what it also recognizes is that if it makes public statements that tells Russia exactly what it's doing, it invites Russia to come out with statements that are inflammatory and start to scare the German population. So what we're seeing now is much more circumspect. I don't think the Germans will ever say we're giving them Taurus missiles. What they will actually just be doing is just under the radar, supporting Ukraine. And then definitely the sort of weather vane is very definitely firmly now in Germany helping Ukraine. And I was quite surprised, to be honest, the other day when I looked to see that if you rank the nations in order of the amount of money and support they're providing Ukraine, America's way out in front, but Germany is number two. We live in the UK. You know, the UK is pretty sizable contribution. Germany exceeds that. And I think that's a big shift we're seeing. Europe is worried because if Russia's feeling emboldened, Ukraine will be vulnerable. A vulnerable Ukraine is a vulnerable Europe. And that's one of the reasons that I'm in Prague at the moment attending a conference. It's one of the reasons European leaders are getting together, scratching their heads, going, what else can we do to stop this grinding war of attrition that Russia is slowly but steadily winning?
Sean Bell, thank you very much.